The Economic Club of Minnesota's mission is to provide a world-class, nonpartisan forum for national and international leaders in business and public policy to discuss ideas that affect how Minnesota can better compete in the global economy. The Economic Club of Minnesota, engaging the world, strengthening Minnesota.
I take the opportunity to introduce our guest speaker and the recipient of this year's Bill Frenzel Champion of Free Trade Award, Carla Hills. She is the chair and Chief Executive Officer of Hills & Company. Ambassador Hills served as U.S. Trade Representative from 1989 to 1993 in the Bush administration and as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and Assistant Attorney General, Civil Division for the U.S. Department of Justice in the Ford administration some years earlier. She's on a number of nonprofit boards, virtually all of which are tied to international relations in one way or another. She's the chair of the National Committee on U.S. China Relations and of the Inter-American Dialogue. She is co-chair of the Council on Foreign Relations, a member of the Executive Committee for the Peterson Institute for International Economics and of the Trilateral Commission. She is co-chair of the Advisory Board of the Center for Strategic and International Studies and a member of the board of the International Crisis Group. She was awarded in the year 2000 the Aztec Eagle Award, the highest honor given by the Mexican government to a non-citizen, and in that she shares that distinction with the namesake of our Free Trade Award, Bill Frenzel, who received that award just last fall. With that, help me welcome Ambassador Carla Hills.
Thank you so much for that really warm introduction. I am incredibly honored to receive this club's Champion of Trade Award, and that it's named for Bill Frenzel, a close, close friend for many, many years. It's remarkable how much good this club does in serving as a platform for leaders in our government, in business, in public policy, to exchange ideas about why trade is important and what it can mean to Minnesota. The talent and experience and the efforts of the three founders have made this club the sparkling success that it is today. What an impressive trio. We start with Bill Frenzel. You've heard a lot about him. Co-founder of this club and a real spokesman for opening global markets. He represented Minnesota's 3rd District for 20 years, and as a ranking member in the House Budget Committee, he became the principal Republican spokesman on economic issues. He was selected by the Congress to serve for 15 years as their representative to the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. His contributions in every respect were enormous. He's very, very much missed, but he'll never be forgotten. And his co-founder, Tim Penny, who you've just heard from, represented Minnesota's 1st District for a dozen years. He served on the Education and Labor and Agriculture, Veterans Affairs Committee, stressing the clarity regarding budget issues. His deficit reduction efforts were widely applauded. Boy, do we need him today. His 3 books, Common Sense, The 15 Biggest Lies in Politics, and Payment Due, are superb. And last but not least of this spectacular trio is the founder and club chair, Mark Kennedy, who served 6 years in Congress representing Minnesota's 2nd congressional district. He was the deciding vote, giving President Bush fast-track authority, now called Trade Promotion Authority, and in helping pass the Central America Free Trade Agreement He is still remembered for his sponsorship of the line item veto and his willingness to reach across the aisle and partner with other members in the House in sponsoring legislation. What a great group, which have created a great club that has never needed more than today. For this club does so much to enhance the understanding of the important benefits that flow from opening our global markets. And looking back, we can be enormously proud of what our nation did following World War II. We were a major force in rebuilding war-torn markets, skillfully using our economic and our diplomatic powers to help rebuild parts of the world that contributed subsequently to the well-being of our nation, but to the world at large. For more than half a century, the United States, whether under Democratic or Republican leadership, firmly believed that free flow of goods, services, and capital would provide economic benefits to nations both rich and poor. As President Kennedy said, a rising tide lifts all ships. And the results flowing from our commitment were spectacular. Today, the United States is $1 trillion per year richer as a result of those market openings. And the opening of our markets to trade and investment has also strengthened the economies of our major allies, including Europe, Canada, Mexico, Japan, and South Korea, and more. And it brought us closer together on a number of policy issues. But the benefits that flow from open markets are not limited to the United States and other developed economies with which we trade and invest most heavily. Developing nations, poor nations, have benefited as well. According to studies by Dr. William Klein at the Center for Global Development, the removal of trade barriers by goods produced by developing countries has a direct correlation to their success in reducing poverty. According to his calculations, on average, when a developing country increases its ratio of trade by 1%, it achieves an equivalent reduction in its poverty. And reducing global poverty through trade agreements not only advances our humanitarian and our developing goals efficiently and in a less cost regime, integrating poor countries into the regional and global trade regimes creates, as we did with the Marshall Plan, commercial opportunities for the future. As those nations climb the economic ladder today, they create the opportunities to be our trading partners tomorrow. And in addition to this development and what I call the act of enlightened self-interest, development helps us avoid or at least reduce potential national security challenges. Failure to enlarge the economic opportunities of developing countries condemns a significant segment of their population to unrelieved poverty, making them susceptible to recruitment by those who would do us harm. And also impoverished nations often lose the ability to enforce their laws and secure their borders, slipping into the status of failed states, making it more difficult for our nation to deal effectively with security problems like terrorism and international crime. And importantly, when governments agree to adhere to a set of international rules supported by a system of enforcement, it encourages domestic adoption of rule of law, respect for property, and transparency, further strengthening the quality of our global system. In short, good, strong trade agreements strengthen the liberal international model that we helped build last century, which has contributed so much to our prosperity and the world's prosperity and security. But our work is not done. We currently are negotiating a number of trade agreements that can make a positive difference. And let me just mention two. First, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. In 2008, the United States joined a trade negotiation commenced by Singapore, Chile, and New Zealand, which now involves 12 Asian Pacific nations with a stated goal of bringing together the economies across the Pacific, developed and developing, into a single trade community. That was our goal 21 years ago when APEC met at Bogor, Indonesia. And the 12 economies currently involved in TPP account for close to 40% of the global economy. A good agreement could deliver substantial benefits to the participants and hopefully will include a welcoming mechanism to expand the agreement to include others in the years ahead. And that raises the issue of China, which is not included in TPP. I personally believe that we must find a way to bring China and the United States into a trade agreement. And we could do that in a number of ways. China could join the TPP. We could negotiate a bilateral trade agreement with China. We could negotiate a series of agreements with China covering sectors like investment. We're already negotiating the bilateral investment treaty with them. The services agreement, we're already negotiating a services agreement. And with other sectors, procurement. And the Peterson Institute on International Economics has done outstanding work in evaluating the various alternatives and developing rules to govern the commercial activity between the world's two largest economies would yield very substantial benefits to both, as well as to the global economy. And failure to do so will result in substantial trade diversion for each and fuel escalating economic tensions as we go forward. Another opportunity to strengthen cross-border trade relations lies in the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, so-called TTIP, a negotiation with the 28 states that comprise the European Union. The European Union and the United States constitute the largest economic relationship in the world, accounting for half of the world's economy, roughly 40% of its trade, and 80% of its capital markets. Our two-way trade tops today $1 trillion per year and supports more than 13 million jobs. And although our tariffs are relatively low, on average about 3%, because of our combined size, eliminating them would give a meaningful lift to the economies on both sides of the Atlantic. But the biggest potential would come from generating change in that maze of cumbersome and costly regulations that are different, but have the same objective. Service sectors like insurance, finance, communications face a regulatory cost burden that we figure is in excess of the equivalent of a 50% tariff. And compliance with differing safety and product standards are even more costly. Finding ways to harmonize or jointly recognize these differences would make our supply chains far more competitive and efficient, and be particularly welcome to small and medium-sized businesses that create a majority of jobs on both sides of the Atlantic. And importantly, a transatlantic agreement, because of its size and reach, would create a powerful incentive for other nations to adopt similar rules, spreading the benefits that flow from regulatory harmonization even further. Now, negotiating these agreements will be hard, but getting them approved by our Congress will be even harder. And we need the passage of Trade Promotion Authority, which is essential to enable our form of government to negotiate and pass strong trade agreements that will open our markets. And that is because our Constitution vests Congress with the power to regulate commerce, levy taxes and tariffs, and vests the executive branch with the power to negotiate with foreign governments. Trade Promotion Authority, TPA, sets up a collaborative process with the two branches of government so they can reach strong trade agreements. This collaboration that has existed between the executive and legislative branches since 1934, when President Roosevelt signed the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act, a predecessor to TPA, and since then, Congress has passed similar bills 18 times. Under these procedures, the President gives the Congress notice. We're going to negotiate a trade agreement. Congress, in the exercise of its constitutional powers, may set objectives for the administration to seek and ask that the administration keep it posted during the course of the negotiation. And in return, Congress agrees that it will approve or reject the agreement but not amend the deal that the administration presents. And our negotiators cannot achieve the best trade deal possible if our trading partners expect that there will be a second negotiation with our Congress. Inevitably, they hold back the very issues that we want the most. So in anticipation of meeting with Congress, they have something to offer. And also, since trade agreements cover hundreds of issues, TPP has 30 chapters, may have more when we finish. They cover hundreds of issues. The participants look at how the whole agreement affects their national interests. And to be successful, our negotiators must strive to strike a balance on a broad range of issues that have differing degrees of importance to the governments participating. So a single amendment, forget multiple, a single amendment can upset the balance and cause that agreement to unravel. And globalization's not going to go away. What happens beyond our borders, for good or bad, will have an impact here at home. We need to make every effort to take actions that will generate good outcomes and minimize the bad. The negotiations of strong trade and investment agreements will benefit our nation economically, enhance our leadership, and contribute to our national security. And we need people that know and speak out and inform their fellow citizens and their elected representatives how the opening of global markets will continue to our growth, leadership, and security, and why Trade Promotion Authority is absolutely essential. And there's no organization more qualified to explain the merits of trade and Trade Promotion Authority than the Minnesota Economic Club. So it is a great honor to be with you and to accept your very prestigious Bill Frenzel Trade Champion Award. So I thank each and every one of you.
So we have time for a couple of questions. You just got some great remarks. If you're paying attention to the trade debate, there was several of those that were controversial. So let's hear some questions from the audience. Raise your hands. We have mics here present. Who's got the first question? If not, right over here. We have a question over here. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Stephanie Lenway from the University of St. Thomas. Thank you for your remarks. I feel really old, but what happened to multilateral trade agreements?
I'm a fervent multilateralist, but I also believe that these strong, high-level regional agreements can make a difference and even contribute to multilateralism. And let me give you an example. When I was trade representative, the Uruguay round collapsed in Brussels in 1990. In 1991, we commenced the negotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement. We concluded that agreement in 14 months. President Bush Sr. signed the agreement in December of 1993. And President Clinton took it through the Congress in 1994. Within 4 months of that agreement taking force, the parties were back at the table of the Uruguay round, and we had a deal. I call that competitive liberalization. So by the way, I was not the originator of that phrase, but it truly does work. And if we get TPP, and even better, TTIP, believe me, Doha will not be dead.
Great question. We'd have another question right over here.
Yes. What can be done to speed up the resolution and disciplining of an actor that violates a trade agreement?
It does take some time to get a trade dispute through the WTO. It's partly imposed by the parties involved. But consider the alternatives. If we did not have a structured trade dispute mechanism, and there was a violation of principles that we believe in, discrimination, no national treatment, it would be the law of the jungle and you'd never get it resolved. So we need to beef up the World Trade Organization. They have too few people. I've often said to my colleagues who work there, what you need is to have a better filing of regional agreements so that those are approved, because we say you can have a free trade agreement bilateral or regionally if it covers substantially all trade. And recently there have been some agreements that don't meet that standard, in my humble opinion. But the fact that the organization needs more resources, more people, more talent, and more time, I still stand by the fact that we're far better off to have the trade dispute settlement mechanism that we have there.
Another question out there? This will almost be worth a one-credit class in trade by the time we get all done here.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. I am a firm believer in free trade. I think that's the way for economic growth and eventually development. And I just had a question about what economic growth means for developing countries, because with free trade, you see that a lot of developing countries experience economic growth, but at the same time, there are violations of human rights, like there were in sweatshops or other barriers that developing countries face. To be a good partner in a trade agreement, but at the same time, how do you account for ensuring that everyone has human rights and is treated equally?
I think your question was, how do trade agreements help developing countries move forward on human rights? And I believe that trade agreements, good trade agreements, do just that. You have to start somewhere. And what a trade agreement does to a poor country that has inadequate institutions is to say, these are the rules. You could use the word law. These are the laws. These are the things you must not do. You must have transparency and you must not discriminate. And if you do these things, there will be a reaction. We will have a mechanism to take action against you, which could result in retaliation against your trade market. Surprisingly, as you have those rules, those principles, and that mechanism for enforcement, it seeps into the domestic economy, and it encourages the adoption of rules, transparency, and institutions in the domestic economy. And you see that with developing countries that have adhered to the multilateral trade regime. So my hope would be, for example, in TPP, that Vietnam, a less developed country, would move faster up the scale to having the kind of trade rules of law that we so much respect.
And it was wonderful to have a great question from one of our visiting students, this one from Macalester University. Way over on the other side here.
Ambassador Hill, thank you for being here today. I want to follow up on a student comment because we have a number of students here and we have a number of up-and-coming professionals in this room. So based on your very successful vocational journey. What advice or what things could you tell those folks in this room who might be aspiring special trade ambassadors someday to influence those kinds of things you've been talking about today? What is it that will take that they need to have to do what it is that you're asking for us to do?
Well, welcome to all your students and the various universities. What I tell my children and what I tell my grandchildren is always do the work that you love. Because if you love it, you will work harder and it'll mean more to you. Always do the best you can, because if you do well, you will be noticed and you will have greater opportunities in the future. Do not plan to be president today, because you don't know that that is possible. But if you do the stair-step mechanism of liking what you do and doing it very energetically with good results, who knows? We may have a president in the room.
That's a happy thought. We'd love to have our first Minnesota president and have them be right here. Vice president is great, but we'll find one of these students. I don't know if we have time for one more question or not. One more question.
Thank you for being here.
Our future president.
Woo! Yes, vote for me, please. So I have the question regarding going back to the trade question, where when you're trading with undeveloped country, a lot of times the trade tends to be a little bit cheaper, bringing goods over here. And so when you start having a actual trade agreement and writing rules on, okay, so there needs to be this kind of system, they need to be paid this amount, the whole justice thing, that it ends up being more expensive to bring those goods here. And then a lot of people will say that they will move on to another developing country that there isn't a strict trade agreement on. So how would that, if we started a trade agreement with China, how would it look to keep the quote-unquote cheap goods coming versus having the goods become more expensive because of all the rules that will be in place?
The rules don't make trade more expensive. What China's experiencing is an increase in its middle class. It's experienced the greatest urbanization in human history. And they may stop making low-end, cheaper products that they made 30 years ago, but they'll move up and make other products. We've seen that in our own country with the Industrial Revolution and then the Technological Revolution. And the challenge for all of us will be to train our populations so that they can move up the escalator as the economies move forward. But there is no way, nor would we want there to be a way, to put a lid on it and say that population has to stay and continue to make and sew slippers. It just shouldn't be that way. It should be opportunity is open, free, competitive, and we all benefit from it.
Well, thank you. As you can tell, we couldn't have picked a better person to be giving this award to following our award last year to Bill Frenzel. Tim and I are just going to give a little background on the award. Actually, when Tim and I and Bill got together to start the Economic Club of Minnesota, we decided that we would be definitively bipartisan, where you see Tim and I up here in essentially every event, but pro-markets, because we believe, as Carla has done a wonderful job of putting forth, that free markets, that the trade amongst people is good for our economies, good for their development, and good for our own security. And so we started this out last year by giving it for the first time to Bill Frenzel. We were, in essence, the only people in Washington to do an anniversary, 20th anniversary celebration for NAFTA. And we gave the award to Bill then. This was renamed the Bill Frenzel Award following his passing. And we're pleased that we were able to give this to Carla here today, and you can expect this to be happening every year from here on out. The award is, from what we know, the only national award focused on recognizing people for their contributions to trade. There's so many people criticizing trade. We thought it would be good to have somebody that would reach out and acknowledge those that were defending it. The committee that decided on this was headed by Bill Frenzel, and it included Ambassador Bob Zellick, the former U.S. Trade Rep and former head of the World Bank, Ambassador Jim Jones, former U.S. Trade Rep and former U.S. Ambassador to Mexico, Dr. Gary Hofbauer, the International Trade Scholar at the Peterson Institute, Jim Baucus, a former Democratic member from Florida and former chairman of the appellate of the World Trade Organization, Mac McClarty, former chief of staff for Bill Clinton, Dave McClellan, president and CEO of Cargill, Steve Sanger, formerly General Mills and president of the club, and myself. So that's the group that decided on Carla, and I'm going to have Tim tell you a little bit more about the award.
Thank you, and by now you can certainly understand why we have determined to name this award in honor of Bill Frenzel as a way to continue his legacy of bipartisan work on free trade. Bill Frenzel was very pleased that his friend and partner in trade, Carla Hills, was selected for this second annual Free Trade Award, and he told us on many occasions that he really wished that he could live long enough to be here to present this in person, though we know he is here with us in spirit. The actual award is an engraved Revere bowl. You can see it to my right here on the table. A Tiffany's replica of a bowl made by Paul Revere in 1768 to protest a series of British taxes on English goods imported to the American colonies. Revere made the bowl at the request of the Sons of Liberty to honor the glorious 92 members of the Honorable House of Representatives of the Massachusetts Bay, who had sent a letter to other colonies protesting British tariffs known as the Townshend Acts. It became one of the most famous silver pieces of the colonial era. The Townshend tariffs put new duties on paper, glass, lead, tea, and paint. None of these goods were produced in America, and the colonists were only permitted to import them from Britain. After the Boston Massacre, all of these tariffs were repealed except the tax on tea, which eventually led to the Boston Tea Party and the American Revolution. We think it's very fitting that the Revere Bowl, which was created to honor those who fought against tariffs in colonial times, will now serve as an award for those who continue to work for free and open trade around the globe. And it is in that spirit that it is now our great pleasure to present the 2015 Bill Frenzel Champion of Free Trade Award to Ambassador Carla Anderson Hills.
Thank you so much. This is a day I shall never forget. And thank you to my good friends here in Minneapolis. I hope I can come back often.
The Economic Club of Minnesota's mission is to provide a world-class nonpartisan forum for national and international leaders in business and public policy to discuss ideas that affect how Minnesota can better compete in the global economy. The Economic Club of Minnesota, engaging the world, strengthening Minnesota.